And good evening to everybody. This is Wednesday, the 21st of October. This is a Piano Hour. Welcome. This is Christopher Daigan welcoming you to our next session in our live stream series, Music Revival Online. This is our live stream number 59. It is Wednesday in KZN. It is another humid, cool afternoon. Cray, but lovely to have you all here. And we are hoping you are going to enjoy our very unusual session this evening. Tonight is the session that was supposed to take place last week, and I postponed it to this week. And it is a informative, not quite lecture, I'm still focusing on the music, there's going to be a lot of music, but it's going to be a focused session. What are we listening to? Part 2, because we had one a few weeks ago. And it was very well received, and I've had several requests asking for more of what we are listening to. And so tonight I'm going to be covering some elements that carry on from where we finished off last time, and that deals principally with the shaping and structures and the architecture, you might say, but really give you an idea as to some of the patterns of some of the music that we listen to regularly. I'm dealing principally and almost exclusively with the music that I play. So we're looking at piano music, keyboard music. I'm going to talk a little bit about things which relate to symphonies and concertos, orchestral music as well. But it really is going to be a detailing and an expansion on some of the ideas, an illustration about some of the shapings of most of the music that I play, particularly relating to music of Beethoven, Mozart and Haydn, as well as to then the music of the 19th century composers, people like Chopin, Liszt, Schumann, etc., people like that. So if you'd like to know more about a bit more about that, please hang on. It's 6 o'clock, so we are starting in a minute or 30 seconds, I think, or maybe it was 30 seconds ago. I should have been starting. We are starting just a fraction late, just to give our computer time to catch up. We failed at the end, the last 5 minutes of both our streams last Wednesday and last Saturday. The computer failed, so we thought we'll start just a few minutes late and try and finish everything before the hour is up. And also this evening, in the middle of the session, I'm going to be answering a few questions which people have been asking about the setup, which you see, not only what you're listening to, but what you're looking at. So here we are. It is 6 p.m. Welcome. Thank you for joining me. Christopher Daigan coming to you from our home in KwaZulu-Natal, South Africa. And tonight's What Are We Listening To? Part 2, I'm going to be dealing with sections of form and structure. Now, to start off, we finished off last session with an illustration about how a sonata by Domenico Scarlatti was constructed. I showed you various melodies or various themes and how they were repeated in different keys. And just to recap, I'm playing a sonata in F minor, and we have an opening theme. Etc., etc. And at some point, this moves through a key. You don't have to worry about that. There's a change of stability. The key is changed, and we end up with a second melody or a second theme, which sounds like this. And then there's a short pause, which is a kind of the halfway mark or the interval in this very short piece of music. The music then carries on at that same. And even as I play there, that short sequence, you'll see it's repeating the same idea, but in different stages. It's going up and up by step, is changing the key, changing the stability. And at some point, we come to a section where we repeat it, we come back to that opening, the second theme. Which ends the piece, except, as you've heard, the first time it came, it was there, and now the second time it's... from a technical point of view, a musical technical point of view, we've changed the key. If the piece was an F, the first time you heard this was in C major. The second time, it's now in F. So there's a announcement of a premiere, a first theme, a second theme which is in a contrasted place, a neighboring country, you might say, a bit of a argument or discussion, and then the second theme comes back, but it's now in the home country. So there's a change. That resolution is come about. The tension that's established by the second theme being in a strange place where it shouldn't be, in a different key, is resolved. So I'm going to play that for you. Again, the first theme. The second theme, the first time. The second theme, the second time. And that's the end of the piece. So this is a sonata, Scarlatti Sonata in F minor. Straightforward sonata in F minor. Scarlatti Sonata showing you the contrast, the change, the repetition of certain themes, a presentation of contrasting themes and a repetition, and how that repetition can be altered, and the substance of it and the tone of it changed on its repeat. Now, having said that, I've played this whole sonata through once, and normally as Scarlatti would write it, at the end of each half, first half where I stopped, and at the end of the second half, he would write a repeat sign, which means that the performer was obliged or suggested, not compulsory, but suggested they might actually play through each half twice. So in fact, when I normally play that, I would play each half through first half, repeat the first half, play the second half, repeat the second half. So it would be a fraction longer. I'm going to play another sonata, similar idea. Another C major. That's the first theme. That's the second theme, second half. The second theme then, when it returns, when it comes back the second time, is altered. So the material, the substance of the music, the melody is exactly the same. It's just transposed into a different part of the keyboard, you might say. It's a different pitch, a different tone, a slightly different atmosphere. So this is another example, sonata in C major by Scarlatti. What delightful, charming music. One of the 500 sonatas by Domenico Scarlatti, but illustrating there the shift of material, the repeat of material at a different pitch. What we would call a modulation to a different key, but the fact that it resolves and it brings it back into the home key is the important part. So this is all technical stuff, but what I'm really trying to point out and what I'm hoping that you'll remember and notice is that there are different melodies or different material that are related, but there is a change and there is a shift. When it's repeated, there is a difference in the way that it is presented. And this is a very important part of development of how this shape and this pattern of arranging material is used, it's developed, it's not seen entirely as a sort of mold, one might say, but it certainly is a useful container that composers used a lot. It was very relevant in the time following Scarlatti, as I say, in particular the music now, the classical period, music of Mozart, Haydn and Beethoven, who used this extension of the idea, which I'm going to show to you now quite extensively. I'm going to play for you the first movement from a sonata by Haydn to show you what they did with this and how they extended this concept and this motion. Now, this is the first movement from a sonata. So this is a sonata for piano. Sonatas generally, the word sonata actually meaning sonore or from sounding, as opposed to cantato, which is canto, which is sing. These sounds or these musics developed, and so an instrumental piece became a sonata, and these are how the concept accumulated its weight or accumulated its ideas. And generally now a sonata in the hands of Haydn, Mozart or Beethoven is a multi-movement work. In Scarlatti it's a single movement as I've played it, but in Haydn now and Scarlatti and Haydn, Mozart, Beethoven it becomes multi-movements. And we're looking at the first movement of a Haydn sonata. So here we go. Opening theme in F major. Very nice little melody, very charming. We might call that the first theme or the opening theme. I would then like to play for you something else, which would be we might call that a second theme. Now again, the first theme is in this key of F major. The second theme suddenly find ourselves in a related neighboring key, which is C major. After the little break, the little interlude, we have some continuation. Various ideas are bandied about. This music works on and it goes through a number of keys. There's a sense of argument and a sense of turbulence before there's a very convenient pause. And we come back to the opening theme. As the music started, the very opening theme repeated again in the home key of F major. The music continues as it did before, but somewhere along the line there's a little shift. And the second theme there's a moth. Moths and pianos again don't go well. The moth's going to eat my piano. I'm always chasing them when I see them. So that second theme is now transposed. It's now changed. I played the wrong one. Has now changed from the first statement in C the higher, the raised key, it is now being placated to the lower key of F major. So all that one really has to listen to in this section, now the sonata is developed. The first part of it, you have an opening theme and a contrasting second theme. Little break. There's a midsection of turbulence, might say, where all of these melodies and themes are perhaps turned upside down, inverted. There's a conversation going on. There's a slight pause. The opening theme is repeated, and instead of going back to the raised version, the second theme appears, but in the placated home key. So you hear two different themes, but the second one is repeated in a slightly different way. It has a different feeling to it, a sense of resolved homeliness, you might say. Resolution has taken place between the two opposing forces. And this is really what the kind of feeling that I'm hoping to point out to you, that sense that these sense of instability is something which is contrasted by a stable idea. Stability in the beginning, challenge, instability in the middle part, turbulence, and then a sense of stability right through to the end of the music. And that is a very important principle to be able to hear and follow these different themes, to be able to sense that there's a change and there's a sense of resolution. So this is the sonata, first movement of the sonata in F major by Franz Joseph Haydn. And listen out for those themes which we pointed out. I hope you followed that. That was the first movement with no written out or no played repeats of the sonata by Franz Joseph Haydn in F major that showed this presentation of different themes in the first section, the turbulence in the middle section and the reprise at least of the opening themes and the second theme, but the second theme now placated or transformed slightly to end. And this very unusual, not very unusual, it's actually very straightforward, but very useful structure, very much used structure, is known as sonata form. This is something that is a musicological, something to study, and if you are studying various aspects of music, it's not something that one has to remember, but the issue is that one has to remember that there are themes which are repeated again in different sections, and there's this discussion between them, which I think is very interesting, this turbulence which happens in what we call the development. Technically, the opening section, the exposition of ideas, the middle section, the development of ideas, and the third section, the recapitulation of ideas, if you'd like the exact technical terms, but that's not really such an important part. I would like to play for you another sonata, first movement of sonata by Mozart in G major, that is going to give you the same structure, the same shaping. So just to point these out before I play. Opening theme in G major in the very secure home key. The second theme in a new key, a change, a shift. Middle section, you might say a development of ideas. The resuming of the opening principal idea. And the second idea. Remember the first time it was? The second time now. So, I'm presenting to you the two different elements, showing you the contrast of how they are changed and altered, and I'm going to play for you the entire movement. This is the first movement of the sonata in G major, K283 by Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. Also demonstrating this practice or this concept of sonata, first movement sonata form. delightful Chinese music there. The first movement of the G major sonata by Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. The third composer, I'd like to show you how they use this very interesting pattern of themes, interesting pattern of structure, and always putting such a variety of ideas into it and extending it somewhat, is now the composer Ludwig von Beethoven. And I'm going to play for you the Sonata Opus 22, the first movement sonata, which I played on Saturday night. And this, as I've said before, Beethoven considered this to be his most perfect and most precise, concise composition up to this point. At an early part of his career, he's emulating and really absorbing all the ideas of the composers around him, his teacher, Haydn. Yes, Lucy. And really coming together and to present something in a very refined and a very structured way that he was, I suppose, expected to do at the time. Okay, I'm going to pick you up here. Lucy's demanding attention already. Oh, yeah. Here we go. What do you know about Sonata Form, Lucy? Were you also wanting to learn? Were you also wanting to learn what's going on? No? Little Luce. Shall we go? Lucy's very keen to get in the picture. It seems like a standard. Once I give her a hug, she seems to be okay. Anyway, so the Sonata Opus 22. Here we go. Showing you the various themes. I hope you're finding this interesting, that these various elements are pointed out to you before I play the piece. Can't do this every time, but I think it is interesting to try and give you a foresight or insight into some of what you're going to expect. Opening theme. Excuse me this evening, a lot of talking and playing back and forward, which isn't always the best thing to do. Second theme. Now, Beethoven is very interesting because he takes this idea and explodes it somewhat. He provides great contrast. So as much as the first theme is very brilliant and outgoing, the second theme is very broad, like a beer drinking chant. Except now I've played the wrong one. This is the right one, right version. That's the first one because that's in a different key. And then finally he leads to little element that I play there is very important because that forms the basis of the next section, this development, this conversation, discussion or argument, how he takes that theme, that melody, and repeats it into many different ways. For instance, and eventually in a very mysterious way in the bass. Almost as though he sucks all the energy out of it and turns it into a very watery mystery before he resumes in the recapitulation, the first theme again. Leading to the very broad contrasting second theme now in the home key. So that resolution has occurred. And finally, I find it one of Beethoven's most It is perfect. It's a perfect textbook version of what this sonata first movement structure is about. Everything is in place, everything is in the right key. It is a really concise and politely Beethoven style, you might say, politely Beethoven version of music of the time. It has a stamp, but it's very fitting into the way that composers were expected to play. Now, as you see, what happened there is, because I'm jumping around, I'm not playing this piece from memory in continuity. I'm jumping back and forward, trying to remember. And this is one of the things which is so tricky about playing this kind of music from memory, because you're playing exactly the same music in two different places in the development of the score, in the piece of music, but it's in two different keys. At one point you're playing it at another time you're playing it, and everything up to that is often exactly the same, and it rests on one or two tiny little details and tiny little notes as to which you go that route or that route, and it happens so often that you end up in the wrong one. Every pianist's nightmare. Anyway, the first movement then, the Allegro from the Sonata Opus 22 by Beethoven. amazing, incredible music. I hope you are enjoying this observation, pointing out these various melodies, shapes, and structures to listen to, as in what we are listening to. This is what we are listening to, part 2, and I hope you are enjoying the pointers. It's really not always. It's not about actually having to know the music. It always helps to know a piece of music, obviously, before you hear it again and again and again. The more you hear it, the more you will know it. And eventually you get to know how these sequences work. But once you hear one sonata or one part of the structure, or you understand one sense of what this shaping and form is about, this idea of repetition of ideas, you start to sense the patterns, and you start to be able to listen to music with an expectation of what might happen or what might actually be coming our way. And that's all. That's really what we're about listening to. What we're listening to is really about is showing the possibilities, showing some of the patterns and the structures, how this may work. Now, at this point in the program, I'm going to take a slight break, and I'm going to answer several questions which have been put to me. 2 weeks ago, we sent out a survey on our mailing list, and we've had a number of people responding and filling in the information and telling us what they've thought about the programs and what kind of programs they've enjoyed. And some of the questions, been a few questions which have come back to me, and I thought, well, it'd be interesting to tell you the answers. They're very simple things. First of all, some number of people have asked about the keyboard, which is, you can see sometimes in the corner of the room. It's a little brown keyboard, which I think Barry, who's running the controls this evening, is going to focus on. And I've asked, what on earth is this keyboard? It's a very tiny piano, and what does it actually do? Well, for some people, it's their favorite piano. It's in fact a silent piano. It's a piano that makes no noise whatsoever. It has no strings, it has no hammers, it has no soundboard. It is an antique silent practice piano, which was found for me on an auction. A friend of mine bought it, restored it for me, and gave it to me. And it's a very beautiful piece of furniture. I don't really use it, but what it would have been used for is to practice on without making any noise. But principally, it's got folding legs. It's actually quite light. And when you were on your travels, on your concert tours around Europe and around the world, and you were traveling for days in between concerts or on a ship maybe, it was very difficult to keep your fingers in shape, very difficult to keep practicing. And so a piano like that, a silent keyboard, it's a full-size 88-key standard modern keyboard, and you could play away and practice all your scales and practice your pieces without making any sound whatsoever, without disturbing the neighbors. And it also has a spring mechanism, so there's a little winder in the front so that you can adjust the weight of the action. And if it's really heavy, it's a really heavy action. You could supposedly make your fingers strong and also strengthen your fingers by practicing scales endlessly with just making strong fingers. I don't believe in strong fingers like that, but nevertheless, some people did at some point. So that is an antique silent piano that you could have put on your stagecoach. You could have practiced on your lap between Berlin and Hamburg on the stagecoach if you want to. Who knows? Liszt might have quite well done that. And that was to keep everyone's fingers nimble. The second question that I've been asked is, why do I sometimes wear my running shoes in the live streams? Why do I appear on these sessions wearing casual shoes or very casual shoes like this? And why do I sometimes wear my pointy concert shoes? And the reason actually is no reason really. But when we started with just one cell phone and a camera and a very simple setup, and in fact you never saw anything. You never saw the floor, you never saw my pedals, and only afterwards did I realize that you were actually seeing my feet when I started watching. Now this obviously is in my home, and this is during lockdown, and I'm also like to feel quite comfortable and quite relaxed. And as no one was going to see my feet, I didn't really bother to put on proper shoes. So I just put on my running shoes, which is quite nice. It makes me feel a little bit more relaxed and comfortable. So I've just kept that. And I hope no one minds. I know it does look very nice when I'm playing proper concerts. I keep it for the Saturday concerts when I'm wearing patent leather shoes, nice, beautiful, shiny, pointy shoes. But it really does feel quite strange, I must be honest. Walking around the house, my own home, when I'm the only one here, all dressed up in concert shoes, it feels really, really, really odd. So I'll keep that for special occasions. And the other thing which I'm keeping for a special occasion is my haircut. Now, a number of people have asked us and said, why on earth, now that I can, am I not getting my haircut? And why is my hair growing to this unusual length? I won't put another adjective there. And the reason is that I just decided, my hair's always been a little bit longer, but since lockdown, I thought I am not going to cut it until this is all over. So when lockdown comes, I will venture out to a hairdresser and have my hair cut, but until then, I'm going to grin and bear it and try and do my best to manage it and keep it all together, keep it all in place as much as I can during the live streams. And the last issue which someone had asked about, and very good news here, another big thank you. The reason that we don't have titles and beautiful graphics and things coming up in our live stream is that our computers simply cannot cope. We've learned that the live stream, to keep it as simple as possible, to try and keep our aging computers running and not failing completely. And this week, a very generous donor, in fact, the same donor, an anonymous donor from London who has supported us before, has sent enough money for us to buy a new computer. So a new computer is on order. We're very thankful to that donor for their support. We know that they are watching once again, so thank you very much for your support, continued support, and your encouragement with these live streams. And the new computer should be arriving end of this week, and hopefully we will have no problems whatsoever, because its sole job is simply going to be to do the live streams and the video program, and for it to cope with everything that we need to feed into it. All right, well, having answered those, I'm going to carry on with our What Are We Listening To session. I've been explaining to you, and I've given you 3 examples now of the sonata, first movement sonata form in the hands of Haydn, Mozart, and Beethoven. And as I say, I've only been referring to or illustrating the first movement of these movements, these works. So a typical sonata in the classical period, in this period, Haydn, Mozart, Beethoven, consists of 3, or sometimes with Beethoven, and 4 movements. Standard structure would be a fast movement using the shaping and the structural impacts that I've just shown you. Second movement would be a slow movement, something very rich and slow. For instance, in the Pathetique of Beethoven, which I've played regularly, or the Appassionata. The slow movement of a Haydn sonata. Beethoven, if he includes 4 movements, not 3 movements in his sonata, includes a third movement that includes an extra special, what we'd call a minuet trio, a very elegant dance. So, for instance, the third movement, this actually the second movement from the Moonlight Sonata is an example. Being the beautiful minuet, and the trio being for the opening minuet is always repeated. I'm going to play the full piece for you in a minute. And then the last movement, any of the composers would have included last movement of very light, energetic, and sprightly nature, which again could take the form of the sonata form structure, which we demonstrated to you a short while ago, or a rondo. and I'm going to try and end off the program with the rondo from Beethoven's Waldstein Sonata. The rondo, as I've explained before, opening theme, the Mozart's Turkish rondo, or rondo alla turca, is a good example. Opening theme. Second idea. And then back to the first, like so. Another idea. Back to the opening. Another contrasting idea. Back to the opening. And so this contrast, returning to the same opening theme, returning to the same opening melody with a different contrasting idea in between each one, is what a rondo is about, and usually in a very sprightly and a very jolly, happy-going environment. So I would like to play for you now a slow movement from a sonata by Mozart. In fact, the slow movement from the G major sonata that I played. And here, interestingly, you will see Mozart uses the same sonata structure, the movement structure, in this piece of music. The second theme. Here in the development, the middle section, you'll hear that same opening idea in various different guises before the initial key. The first theme reappears. That's the level at which you hear it the second time. The first time, which is at a distant neighboring key. The second time you hear it in the home key. Wendy and Lucy seem to be having an absolute riot here. What's going on, girls? Minuets and Trio, second movement from Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, the Sonata Opus 27, number 2, as an example of what Beethoven would have normally put in the third movement if he was using four-movement structure, four-movement shape. Before that, the slow movement from the Sonata in G major as an example of what Mozart would have done with the slow movement, and in that case he still uses that same first movement, single movement sonata structure, not to be confused with the structure of the four movements. Now I'm going to leave the rest of what I was hoping to tell you a little bit about some of the 19th century music in terms of the outlying patterns of Chopin's music, or Schubert, Schumann and Liszt for instance, because that's actually a little bit simpler, actually, what I was going to show you. But just to say that this structure, as I said, now I'm dealing largely or only with piano music. But in fact, all of these ideas you will find in music, symphonic music of the time. So for instance, I'm playing a sonata for piano. Symphony by Beethoven or Haydn or Mozart is for an orchestra, a full orchestra, and the same pattern you'll find there of 3 or 4 movements with Beethoven usually. 3 movements are fast, using that same sonata shaping, as I've explained to you, movement shaping of the sonata form. The second movement, very gentle, more slow movement, and the last movement, sprightly, full of energy. And in Beethoven's music, again, he then starts playing around. He adds in a third movement of this minuet of elegance before the fourth movement takes on a whole new guise where it's a sense of triumph and resounding brilliance that resolves the entire music that he has presented before. And the same sense of a piano concerto or violin concerto, for instance. Concerto then, as someone had asked, what is a concerto? Well, concerto is a symphonic work. So this is a piece of music for an orchestra. But instead of being the symphony, the star of the show, they're featuring, a concerto features a solo instrument. So it's either a piano, which is added, which is now the star. The piano is not part of the orchestra. The piano is the soloist. You have the orchestra here and the piano separate. It's an equal balance. And the piece of music is there to showcase what the piano can do, what the pianist can do, can show off. In a violin concerto, then you will have the violin being the star, or a flute concerto being the star, not just a part of the orchestra. You might have lots of violins or flutes in the orchestra, but there is a soloist who is the star of the show, and that is what a concerto is about. So with Mozart obviously writing 27 piano concertos, he was a brilliant pianist and used them to showcase his ability, compositional and performing abilities as well. Beethoven wrote 5 rather incredible music that Beethoven wrote in his piano concertos. And the one thing that I'm particularly interested in, and this also relates to this idea of what we are listening to, briefly I'm going to tell you, a cadenza. No, Lucy, you can't have a cadenza. Lucy's having a cadenza. You want to come up? She doesn't stop barking unless I pick her up. Do you want to stay here? Do you think I'm talking too much? You want more music? Huh? Okay, quiet now. Come and sit on your special cushion. So this idea of a cadenza, it's quite important because in terms of what we are listening to, this is one of the most structurally, not structurally, but from its most uncertain parts of the concerto that you'll hear. Because often we might hear one recording or one performance, but particularly a recording because you get to know what the music is. And suddenly you hear another recording or another performance and they're not playing the same music. There comes a point where the pianist plays, for instance, on their own for a while and they're playing a completely different piece of music. And what on earth is that? Well, cadenzas are very interesting things. And in the music of Mozart, for instance, very important, it actually means cadence. Cadence meaning this. That's a cadence. So it's the sort of end of a sentence, it's the end of a phrase, it's the final step, you might say, to complete the phrase. And in previous times, Baroque times, it was very traditional for singers to sing an aria, and at the end of their passage, at the end of their section, which they would sing, so we have, for instance, and that's the end of the section, and the music would carry on. And that is the cadence. Now then at some point it became fashionable to take a little bit of time. Even though it's not written, it was like, well, we're going to take a little bit of time over this. And eventually, well, maybe one singer did that, and the next singer came along to the orchestra and said, well, I want to do... because he wanted to have a chance to show something off. And eventually, everyone added and added until someone said, well, why doesn't the orchestra just stop? And the singer went for it. And they would have a cadence, have a cadenza. I suppose that's where that expression comes from. When you have a complete flight of fantasy, you go off at a tangent and indulge in a moment of indulgence and fantasy and rage sometimes. And this would be an opportunity for the soloist to show how high, how low, how loud, soft they could sing, and even have an opportunity to revisit some of the melodic interest they'd had in the aria or in the aria they had just sung. And so it became fashionable, and in Mozart's time, in his piano concertos, these were improvised by any performer who played a piece of music would improvise their own cadenza. So no cadenza would be included in the music, just even in Mozart's writes a trill and Mozart a pause, and Mozart would write, make up your own improvisation. And then the orchestra would carry on. And fortunately for us, Mozart wrote out of the 27 concertos about 20 of these cadenzas on separate pieces of paper, not in the actual score. He wrote them down, maybe for his own use. He was a brilliant improviser. So I'm not sure, he might have written them down because actually the cadenzas that he did write down are very intrinsically linked. They're not just random pieces, they're very carefully crafted in terms of how they relate to the music that he's just played. But for students and for others' use, they were available, and they are available. But some of them, he didn't. In fact, some of the most popular concertos, the D minor, and so Mozart didn't leave us a cadenza, and we'd have to play one. So Beethoven wrote a cadenza, Brahms wrote a cadenza, Saint-Saëns, lots of composers, lots of musicians have written cadenzas, and it's still common nowadays for pianists to play and create their own moments to insert in there. So that's why, as I say, when you hear a recording and suddenly on a different recording or a different performance, that section where the pianist or the soloist plays on their own might be a completely different piece of music. It's improvised. If Mozart did write something, then it's generally used. In Beethoven's concertos, out of the 5 concertos that he wrote, we're fortunate that he did actually include and write separate cadenzas for each of the concertos. And for the 4th concerto, he actually wrote 2 for each, the first and the last movement. And so again, if one recording of your pianist chooses to play one of Beethoven's versions, another pianist might play another of Beethoven's versions in that moment. It would sound completely different. When it comes to the Emperor Concerto, there's a point, and Beethoven writes very clearly in the score, he says, I've had enough of this, I don't want anyone improvising cadenzas in my music, thank you. I've taken a lot of trouble to write all of this, I want you to play exactly what was written. He writes, do not play a cadenza, play only what is here. Whatever it is. No improvising, thank you, in Beethoven's 5th piano concerto. And by that point, it was the composer saying, even if someone else is going to play my music, I want them only to play what I write. I don't want this folly, fanciful improvising in my concertos. No, thank you, you are going to play what I've written. And that was basically the end of that. So no one, concertos after that Chopin, Schumann, Grieg, exactly. Everything is written out. Cadenzas are written by the composer, and this idea of a cadenza does not exist as an improvisation. That's going to bring us to the end of our music this evening. I hope you've enjoyed our session with What Are We Listening To? Volume 2 or Part 2. We'll follow up with the third session in a couple of weeks' time. Please join me on Saturday night when I'm playing a really, really exciting program of music by Jean-Philippe Rameau, Rachmaninoff, Ravel, more Beethoven, Boskovsky. Very, very brilliant, actually, a very brilliant and exciting program. And Schumann, a movement from the Schumann Fantasy. And we look forward to seeing you then. Thank you for joining us. If you are able to support us, please visit our website for the donations page. And we look forward to having some new exciting things for you next week and coming up in the weeks ahead. Keep well and look after yourself. I'm going to play out with a little improvisation.